Hi, I'm Michelle Sterling for Friends of Science Society. Earth Day comes and goes every year, and it's come and gone this year again. So, this is a bit of a climate and energy roundup because there's so much going on. Clintel, the climate intelligence group out of Europe, which has over 900 scientists and scholars who state there's no climate emergency, Clintel is wondering why Greta Thunberg was called to testify to Congress on climate change and not the golden boy economist of the climate change movement. They're wondering why Greta was called to testify to the EU and not William Nordhaus. In their new publication, Undue Climate Haste, produced for the European conservatives and reformists of the EU Parliament, they show that even if you accept all the climate claims of alarmists, when you use Nordhaus's evaluations, you'll find that it's better to do nothing than bankrupt the world. Remarkably, the Nobel Prize 2018 winning climate economist William Nordhaus showed in his Nobel lecture in Stockholm that the economic optimum for climate policy is to allow 3.5 degrees Celsius of warming by 2100. Economically, it's better to accept a certain amount of climate damage and to limit the cost of mitigation than the other way around. Ambitious goals such as staying below 2 degrees or even 1.5 degrees Celsius are extremely costly. So, in Greta's testimony to the US House, she claimed that future generations will hold current leaders like Biden and Trudeau accountable for climate catastrophes, which she claims are driven by subsidies to fossil fuels. But in fact, Roger Pielke Jr. and Justin Ritchie have shown that the claimed climate crisis stems from the use of outdated science and the misuse of a wildly exaggerated, implausible scenario known as RCP 8.5. Pielke Jr. notes that there's kind of an unstoppable momentum to outdated science. And I did a whole presentation on this topic for Freedom Talk. It's on our blog entitled, Will a Carbon Tax Stop Climate Change? In other news, Canada's Minister of Climate Change and Environment, Jonathan Wilkinson, is pushing for immediate action on Bill C-12, meant to put climate targets into law. As shown in a recent live stream PowerPoint and our report, Cruel and Unusual Punishment, Canada's climate targets will destroy the economy and do nothing for the environment or climate change. And you can see that on our blog. The report, the video, and the PowerPoint are all there. Meanwhile, Canada's Heritage Minister and former climate activist with Greenpeace and Equiterre, Stephen Guilbeault, has issued a Caption This tweet for Earth Day, comparing Erin O'Toole in an I Love Canadians Oil and Gas t-shirt with the minister in a Liberal Party t-shirt that claims climate change is real. Well, if the minister knew anything about oil and gas, he would know that many of Canada's great geoscientists have actually held climate change in their hands. And by this, I mean the drilling cores that carry the story of Earth's climate change recorded in the rock. So whose judgment should we accept? A climate activist minister whose past organizations were foreign funded and some of which had a stated target date to destroy investment in the oil sands? Or should we believe real geoscientists who have touched the truth of climate change within the rocks of time? So the caption we chose is, Canada is competing in the Oil Olympics, not a walkathon. Since we are billions in debt due to COVID, maybe it is time the government acknowledged that none of our competitor nations are destroying their economies with crazy climate policies. In fact, they're laughing all the way to the bank. Minister Guilbeault was one of the first people to call Alberta's oil sands dirty. He's also wrong about that, as shown in Robert Lyman's new report, Dirty Lies. And no surprise, the New York Times also came out with a piece trashing the oil sands, citing climate activist experts like Catherine Abreu. Miss Abreu is featured in Matthew Embry's film Global Warning, a sponsored content show linked on our YouTube channel. In the film, Dr. Ian Clark, a real scientist, takes Catherine Abreu to his lab at the University of Ottawa. He shows her that carbon dioxide has short-term residency in the atmosphere, and the threat of climate change is wildly overstated. Yet, she still continues shilling for her activist group of over 100 environmental groups and unions. Many of them are tax subsidized by you, Canada. So they're tax subsidized and putting you out of work and our country in debt, spreading falsehoods about the oil sands and climate change and scaring little kids. Why do we put up with it? And at the climate summit, John Kerry, Biden's special climate envoy, would like to get rid of all the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Just so you know, that would kill every living thing on the planet. In Montreal, a group of scientists and a lawyer are asking the CBC why they will interview American climate scientists and activists, but they won't interview Canadian scientists who hold dissenting views on climate. What on Earth interviewed Dr. Genevieve Gunther, known as Dr. Vive on Twitter. She's trained as a Renaissance scholar. Yet CBC seems to think she's a climate expert. Meanwhile, there are real climate experts in your backyard, CBC. Interview those with dissenting voices, too. So this is a good question for everyone to ask of their media outlets. Since the federal government funds CBC for at least $1.4 billion a year, and the federal government underwrites most other forms of media in Canada for millions of dollars, it is time that these outlets represent diverse climate views of rational, dissenting scientists, rather than the paying public, you, being subjected to nonstop propaganda by Mother Corp and others. In other news, Navius Research has come out with a brief entitled Towards Canada's Fair Share. This ludicrous notion is debunked by Robert Lyman's earlier report, The Tragic Delusion of Doing Our Share. Few people realize that Western nations are the climate activists in the world. Perhaps imbued with hubris, they think that they can wrestle various emerging nations to the ground and stop climate change. But as illustrated by Robert Lyman's report, When Giants Arise, Western nations combined are nothing in terms of demographic or geopolitical power, and our influence will simply weaken over time. As Robert writes, the combined populations of Europe and North America are only 15% of the world's total. The population of Asia is 4 times as large. In closing, let me ask you how you're enjoying Bill McKibben's vision of a climate-friendly world. Here's how Matthew Nisbet recounted McKibben's vision from 1989. That we would end our addiction to fossil fuels, economic growth and consumerism, that we would rarely travel, that we'd experience the world via the internet, that we would power our communities with wind and solar, and divert our wealth to developing countries, and all of it to set a moral example for countries like China to change course. Really? On that note about wind and solar, we've got a new report out called The True Cost of Wind and Solar for Alberta, and also a blog post about virtual power purchase agreements. So I invite you to have a look at that, and you'll be in shock. So I hope that gives you a glimpse of how Earth Day activists are leading us all down the back lane toward carbon serfdom, heat-or-eat poverty, and neo-feudalism. If you don't like that idea, join Friends of Science Society, donate to our organization, share our materials, and demand open, civil debate, freedom of speech, and full cost-benefit analysis of climate and energy policies. Don't be the tax-paying pawns of misinformed climate activists. Push back now. And one more thing, on a positive note, watch Marine Poole's film, Return to Eden, free viewing on our YouTube channel. It's the perfect complement to the Earth Day theme of Restore Our Earth, and it's filled with common sense on climate. For Friends of Science Society, I'm Michelle Sterling.